I am live. Hello, hello, hello. I don't know if the audio is working. I don't know if that's what that means. Let me see. All right, if you're on the chat, let me know. Okay, I think it's working. Sweet. What's up, guys? This is Juan Jaramillo, team lead with Empower Homes, and we are live. So today I wanted to kind of go through three scenarios or three different situations and process if it makes sense to buy a home or it makes sense to rent a home. I think, especially in this market, or you talk to any real estate or lender, um, I feel like the population or the public in hand, depending on obviously who they're talking to, can sometimes feel like, yeah, of course, a realtor is going to tell you it makes sense to buy, or a lender is going to tell you it makes sense to buy. And so I kind of wanted to create this video because I feel like it's such a nuanced subject of how I would process it. So if somebody came up to me in this situation, just so you know, I have 7 years of experience as a realtor, not the most, not the least. Over 100 plus transactions. I'm probably pushing 200 at this point, and the last probably 4 years or 5 years, 5 years or so. And so I've got plenty of experience in helping clients buy and sell a home. And I think the one thing I really wanted to kind of go through with this live is how I process issues that clients come up to me, or friends and family come up to me asking me, does it make sense from in my situation to buy? Does it make sense to rent? And fun fact, actually, me and my wife, about 3 years ago, we sold our townhome in Greer, and we ended up finding a really cool apartment here in downtown Greenville to rent. And it's because, well, I guess we'll go over that process here in a little bit about the processing. For us, it made sense. For us, we wanted to kind of have that lifestyle um, before we had kids, and so it made a lot of sense. So if you excuse me if I'm not looking directly at the camera, it's because I got my handy dandy chat GBT to help me with these scenarios that we can process. And hopefully this kind of will help you decide if renting or buying makes sense. Regardless of, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or later in this Q&A, I'd love to see what you guys have, so we can maybe we'll process the issue together. But the first case study I kind of want to go through, or mental exercise, if you may, is this is going to be for people that are looking into moving out of their parents' house. And I have a ton of clients that have had the situation before. A ton of friends, a ton of friends in their mid to early 20s, or late 20s to early 30s, and that are in this situation. They live in their parents' house, they make good money, and now they're thinking, do I want to move, buy a home? Should I rent for a little while? And the real answer is it depends. And so this is how I process this issue. When somebody comes up to me and says, should I buy a home? One of the first few questions I ask out of the gates is, I want to know, is buying a home even an option? Right? Because if it's not an option, what are we doing? We're kind of wasting our conversation, we're wasting our mental exercise, our energy, I should say. And so, what's your credit score? If your credit score is mid sixes plus, then the answer is maybe. If you have some, let's say at least 3.5% down payment, some money saved up, then you can continue to ask. If closing costs is another 3%. So usually you want to have 7% of the sales price. Usually in a perfect world, but I mean, 3.5 would be enough. So they got some money saved up. They've got a decent credit score, mid sixes plus. They have a decent credit score. And two other things is they have a decent income. If you're making 30K or less, depending on the home you're looking for, that's going to be tough to buy a home. Um, it's also going to be tough to find a good rental nowadays because they're always asking for 3x your rent, but it's going to be tougher to buy a home. And then I think the other thing would be is how much debt you have. Because one thing that I don't think, actually, now I'm thinking about it out loud, that renters don't really care about, or property managers don't really ask for, is how much debt you have compared to the income. So if you have a ton of debt, big car payment, but a decent income, that might ruin your chances to buying a home. But for rentals, you might have no problem at all. And so those are really going to be the first questions: is can you buy a home to begin with? So that would be my first step before I decided, does buying make sense or does renting make sense? All right. Second step: what are your short term, long term, and lifestyle goals? So one thing I've noticed is, for myself, because I kind of, I guess, if I'm processing it myself, is um, the short term goal is going to be, do I want to gain independence? I'll find a safe, affordable place, keep monthly costs manageable. If you're going to buy a home, at least in this market around Greenville, it's been my experience that it's going to be more expensive per month to buy a home than to rent an apartment, even a nice apartment. I'll give you an example. You can find a pretty decent apartment for anywhere from 15 to $1,800, two bed, two bath, not three bed, two bed, two bath type of thing, in a nice area in Greenville. Even if you get lucky in downtown, in near downtown Greenville, I should say, with nice granite countertops, nice apartment. 1,800 a month, depending obviously on so many different factors, but in general, 3.5% down payment, decent credit score, FHA, you're looking at a home around 225 to 240. Finding a home around 225, 240 near Greenville is tough, man, especially somewhere where you might prefer to live in. And so, you kind of need to weigh that consideration of, what kind of lifestyle do you want short term? Here's the benefit, however, so that's kind of the pro, or like pro rent, right? That's kind of you wanting to go to the rent side of things versus buy side. Lifestyle is kind of nicer for the dollar that you're giving, right? 1,800, nice apartment, two bed, two bath, even one bed, one bath in downtown Greenville type of thing, versus 225, 240 time, type of price range for a home. Unless we're talking townhome. Townhome, you can actually find new construction, um, pretty available, and near Wade Hampton, things like that. Um, so that's kind of the math. Yeah, some certain considerations to take. Now that's kind of the pro rent side. The pro buy side, or the would be, and this happened to me, is if you buy right now, yes, right now home prices aren't really going up in value that often. 100%. They're pretty stagnant, and they're probably going to be stagnant for a little bit. But 5 years, 10 years down the road, or even let's say 3 to 5 years down the road, all of a sudden you've got equity in your home, and that helped us pay a lot of debt down when we were younger. Just the equity that we had, we kind of got in a little situation that we were able to sell our house and pay off a ton of debt. It was just a big plus. And so those are the kind of, and if we rented, that possibility doesn't exist, right? Because you're 100, you have zero equity. It's just a straight fee. At a minimum, with real estate, you're at least paying down even if the real estate isn't going up in value, you're at least paying down the amount that you owe in real estate. There's a saying, it's, you want to be a millionaire and buy $1 million real estate property, and then have somebody else pay it off. Or in this case, you can pay it off yourself, and then boom, you're a millionaire, right? So you're still using the property and you're paying it off at the same time. And if you're renting, you don't have that pro. So that's one thing to consider, even when you're young, obviously, because of the compounding effect, even in real estate, as you're young, is what kind of lifestyle do you want to have early in your years? You want to live near downtown Greenville, and is that your scene? Is that kind of, you've always wanted to kind of feel what that looks like, what that feels like to live, or do you want to own your own real estate and kind of live a little further away, and maybe not as nice, cosmetically speaking, um, but 3 to 5 years from down the road, you're going to have a decent amount of equity, some good net worth. That might be something worth considering. All right, so that's the moving out of the parent side. Now the upgrade dilemma, right? So here's where it becomes a little bit more tougher. Let's say you're trying to upgrade, right? So I'll give you the situation. Let's say you're married, You've got a kid, another one coming out of the way. You are coming on the way, um, and you bought a home 4 years ago. Your interest rate is 3%, and now you want a larger home. You want to upgrade that home. Maybe you bought a resale property 3 or 4 years ago, but what you really want to do is buy a new construction property, and now you want a larger property because you have more, larger family. This is where it can get a little tough. And here's a couple things that I would consider. So whenever I have these because I have actually this conversation quite frequently, and I try to find a way. If there is a way here, and here's the first question: is do you need the equity from your current property in order to buy the next home? That's the first question. Why? Because you have to ask yourself, what is the best case scenario? Maybe that is actually the first question: is what is your best case scenario? Because not everybody wants to be a landlord. Um, I think it's easy to say from I think people that aren't landlords, it's easy to be like, oh, why don't you just rent your property? Being a landlord, so not everybody wants to be a landlord. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, what's your best case scenario? Is the best case scenario just to sell the home you have, buy the next one, and have the best possible mortgage payment on the next home? Or is the best case scenario to rent the property you own right now, have it cash flow nicely, and then use some of that to then buy your next property? So that's the first question that you got to lay out for yourself. Now, the second scenario is, or I guess the second question is, let's say, yes, you can rent out. It's probably going to cash flow nicely if you bought the home 4 years ago. Your interest rate is 3%, so you're probably going to cash flow anywhere from $300 to $600 is my rough estimate. And so then the next question is going to be, do you have the cash or the capital in order for the down payment to buy the next home? So let's say you do. That's the best case scenario. Let's say you do, then that's easy. You're essentially able to get a lease agreement on this property, that property. Assuming here's another thought: is it a FHA or conventional loan? If you bought it 3 or 4 years ago, my thought is it's a conventional loan, especially if you had decent credit score back then, because 4 years ago conventional loans were just a better deal. And so, you would keep that conventional loan, you get that lease agreement. That lease agreement allows that debt to not affect your ability to then buy the next home, right? And so the next home, you put the down payment, you're good to go. You get a tenant, and everything is. It's quite beautiful at that point. Now, what most of the time happens is you don't have the capital to buy your next home, especially you're talking about a $500,000 home upgrade. It's your second home. You might want to go FHA. You probably will go FHA in this market, no matter really what your credit score is, unless you have an extremely high down payment. But in this situation, we don't. So at a minimum, you need a 3.5% down payment, right? Let's call it $15,000 just for easy numbers, and you don't have it. But you have this property that has a ton of equity, probably $100,000 of equity. So what do you do? Well, you have two options. You can get a HELOC in order to pull that capital out. A couple considerations is you want to make sure that the rent still covers not just the HELOC, but not just the primary or the first mortgage, but also the HELOC, so it cash flows nicely. Or you can do a cash out refi or just a second mortgage on the equity, and so you'll have to talk to a lender to see what makes the most sense. But still, and don't forget this piece, because a lot of people forget this piece: the rent doesn't just have to cover the mortgage now, or the original mortgage. The rent also has to cover the second mortgage that you get onto it, to be able to pull the capital out and then use it to buy your second home. And that's where it can get a little complex, um, especially if you're not in this world all the time. What's another consideration that you might need to have is your taxes, and this can sneak up on people. While your taxes, and you're gonna have to check this with the I guess a tax professional, but I was told once by not everybody knows this. I was told once by an attorney that while it says your primary taxes is 4%, you're actually only taxed around 2% of the property value. So if you ever do the math, that's why it doesn't really come out at 4%. If you ever try to do the math and figure it out yourself, it's actually closer to 2%. So your primary property right now, you're taxing 2%. Once it becomes an investment property, it goes up to 6%. So it triples. And that ends up being about a couple $100 a month that it ends up changing. So you need to consider those changes to make sure that if you do end up renting it, it still cash flows nicely. And so that's where people end up deciding to sell unless, yeah, unless they want to go through the, let's say, the work in order to rent it. So those are the couple different things that you might want to consider if you're in this situation. And I mean, after that, I mean, it's pretty simple. It can get complex if you decide to sell. There's a ton of different options if you decide to sell than to buy. But I guess the reasons why you might want to do that is you don't want to go through the work of putting the home, getting the capital out of your home. You don't have enough capital, or you just don't want to deal with the tenant situation. I think the biggest pain is finding a good tenant. If you have a good tenant, you're set, right? But if you have a terrible tenant, I've heard it's a nightmare. And even if you have a good tenant, I had a really good tenant. There were always a week or two, just a week, late in their payment. They were great tenants. They took care of the home real well, and they had no issues. And but that was I would say lucky from our part because we didn't do any kind of due diligence on them, to be honest. All right, case study number 3 of it, if it makes sense to buy or sell or buy or rent, sorry, buy or rent. Um, you're unsure about how long you're gonna stay. So 3 or 4 years ago, if you weren't sure of how long you were gonna stay, you could get away with buying a home and selling it in 2 years, no problem, no problem. As of like 2 years ago and 3 years ago, if you're in a townhome, if you're trying to sell right now, you're looking to break even because here's the truth is selling a property costs about 8%. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that when you bought the home's value increased by at least 8 to 10% to make sure that you break even and let alone make some money out of it. So if you are in the situation, most likely you'll need to rent. It's the easiest thing to do. In general, it makes the most sense. However, depending on how savvy or how well how good you are in real estate, and all I mean by how good you are in real estate is how would I explain that? How good you are about analyzing deals and understanding what a good deal is versus not a good deal. Depending on that skill set, if you have that skill set, it might make sense to buy. Why? Because if you find a good deal, let's say you buy a property, a townhome, but you always have it in the back of your mind that, hey, I'm buying this property, and this property, I've done the analysis. I know it can rent and cash flow even after I move, even after the taxes go up, the home insurance might go up a tiny bit. Um, Even considering those things, I'd rather go ahead and buy now, lock in the good rate, lock in all the promotions or incentives that you might be able to get because that'll be your primary for the next couple of years, and then I can rent and that will cash flow nicely. Right now in this market, that's tough to do at the interest rate that we're in, but if you're savvy enough, I mean, yeah, it's 100% possible. Let's say right now, in this moment, Dealhorn's offering 3.99 interest rate. Let's say you lock in a nice, inexpensive new construction townhome for 3.99. Keep this in mind. In 3 years, you're not going to be able to sell it, but you might be able to cash flow because that 3.99 is fixed for 30 years, right? And so those are a couple of the plays, I guess, or the way I would process those situations. And I'll cut it at that. I'll try to make it in 10 minutes. I know I have a lot to say. I hope this helped. I hope this helped. So I'll open it up to Q&A. I know I've got one person live. I don't know if you don't mind asking a question. I don't know if that's just me looking at this video. But I'll open it up for a couple, let's say I give it a minute for any Q&A. Maybe that you're going through a situation right now and you're not sure if it makes sense to buy or rent. Um, I try to pride myself in not talking anybody into just buying just because I'm a realtor. I try to make it. I would only do it if it makes sense. And so I try to understand your situation as you understand it, so I could become the best possible advisor for you. All right. I think that's it. Last time I had my wife on, she's not on. So when Daniel, you do this editing, I told your ass to be live. But I hope this was helpful, and we'll do this again next week. This was Juan with Empower Homes. If you're ever interested in buying or selling or having that conversation, feel free to reach out to us down in the comment section below, and please subscribe. I hope you got some good value out of this video.